Welcome everyone to today's Future of Contingent Workforce series. Today's conversation is called From Cost Savings to Business Value, Evolving the Conversation. You hear about a lot of the panels that go on. We talk about cost savings a lot. And when it comes to contingent labor, customers are so focused on cost savings and managing margin out of suppliers that there's very little focus on the value add that they can get by looking at increasing delivery, which ultimately increases speed to market, where customers can bring products to market and increase top line revenue. Many of us lose sight of what value MSPs are trying to create for the business, and how do we change the conversation from not only cost savings to include value and include this value add. The conversation today is to discuss how to create an ecosystem to make this very thing happen. Our special guests are Angie Hewitt, President of Technology and Alliances for BTS WG Consulting, Brian Nelson, Senior VP Transformation Services at WG Consulting, Gabriel Silva, Program Director at Guidant Global, and Gordon Niebylski, VP of Operational Excellence Americas at Chart Industries. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, we're excited. I think our conversation before was really interesting, and so I'm really excited about today. I want to start off with, we're about a quarter into this year. Has the year gone the way you thought it would go, and what are your priorities for the rest of the year? Gordon, you want to start?
Absolutely. So has the year gone how I thought it was going to go? Absolutely not. But not in a bad way. You know, obviously, just with all the geopolitical turmoil that's going on, you know, my task at Chart right now is to really kind of start to lead our transformational efforts and try to get a lot of our costs down, and especially as we're about to be acquired by Baker Hughes and all that. So typically, you know, last year I came into the company about March 31st, 5 days in was when they did the tariffs, right? And so we're having to navigate that scope and that landscape for the past year. And then I don't think a lot of people saw what was going to happen with the Iran war coming either, right? So in the manufacturing industry, when you're dealing with aluminum and steel and all these raw products that have these spikes in that wartime, it really just creates these bubbles, right? And then there's this ripple effect that goes into all the majors, right? Because especially if you start to look at what we do, we're more so on capital projects front, you know, especially Chart is an LNG company, right? We're building cryo equipment and all that. And so what you have there then is all these major players. So, you know, the Exxons, the Chevrons, you know, being represented by EPCMs like Bechtel and all that start to put a lot of things on hold. Right. And they start to really want to see what's going to happen geopolitically. Is this Iran war going to be, you know, long term? Is it going to be short term? And again, it has that ripple effect throughout the industry, through the supply chain. So the good news is that, you know, there's a great quote that I learned in my MBA program is never waste a good crisis. And this is when supply chain procurement, contingent workforces become paramount to the success of your company. Right. So this is a little bit of a crisis, but let's not waste it as an industry is what I always say. So
you're basically in the middle of every government policy decision.
It's great. So, yeah.
It keeps life interesting, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's a great learning experience. We'll put it that way. So,
I bet it is.
Yeah.
Gabriel, your thoughts?
Man, I think a little bit different from Gordon, but on the same line, depends on the angle you're looking at it. If you look at a list that we did when we did our first or 2025 review and everything we promised to deliver and do, all the boxes were checked. And funny enough, you know, when you wake up in the middle of the night, like, am I on track with things? And you go and then you start, and you're like, yes, we promised, it's delivery on track. However, with all the emerging changes in the market, and as our clients start to evolve with the market and the needs, right, that they have, and they prioritize what they prioritize, their priorities change, we shift and pivot and we go along. So ask me that same question maybe later and it'll be like, well, yes, but I think what we are now promised next might shift based on their needs and in priorities.
100%. And Angie, what are you seeing for your priorities and what your clients are seeing for the next quarter?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like we came out of the gate pretty hot, you know, in January with a fair amount of activity as far as buyers wanting to look at their program providers. And we've seen a little bit of I don't want to say a pause, but they're taking a bit of a different approach now. Whereas instead of just going to RFP, they're taking a step back and they're evaluating their entire program and determining what strategy do they want to employ with their overall program, and then deciding what type of bid they want to go to. So that's a little unique for this industry. You often just see kind of the flurry of RFP activity, and instead we're seeing everyone take a pause, reevaluate. Does our current program structure align with our priorities as an organization? And if not, should we change it? Is now the time to make a change?
Absolutely.
Yeah. To that, Angie, you typically get the Gen 1 is just the automatic movement. Gen 1 to Gen 2 to Gen 3 client, and that you just went down that path, and now it's the Gen 1 to Gen 2 or now it's Gen 2 to Gen 3. Before they take that leap, they're like, wait a minute, am I on the right path? Is this what I need to be doing? And it's not just from the non-MSP and MSP clients. It's really looking at the program holistically. Like, have I done my my demand planning of contingent versus FTE? Have I done that correctly? I feel like the conversations are just different than what we were expecting to have going from the tailwinds in Q4 into, really thinking that 2026 was the year of our staffing suppliers, coming out of 24 and 25. And, the conversation is just now different. And the client and the buyers are looking at taking, like Angie said, taking a step back and saying, are we really, is this the path we want to be on?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely say that the staffing industry had gone through like a drug overdose and growth in the first early 20s. And now we're kind of going through this rationalization. And I guess one of the things I'd ask you, Brian, to follow up with your question about the different changing landscape. So we really spent a lot of time looking at global programs the last few years. And now between tariffs and companies wanting to bring their supply chains back home, are you seeing a more localized approach with your customers?
Yeah, I think, and I think to go to that point, it's not only just looking at it, rest of world, domestically, not looking at it that from that perspective. It's understanding where the talent is. So they may think that, yeah, we've got this global program, but they really don't understand where the talent is. So like I said before, it's taking that step back and understanding where the headcount is, where the demand is. I guess I should say it better, where the demand is, not necessarily where the headcount, because so often people talk about, oh, my headcount is here, I need to be here. Well, what's your demand? And then let's look at the headcount. But looking at that demand and saying, all right, let's focus on where we can make the most bang for the buck for the program. And so often a lot of it is let's internalize, let's look at this domestically so that we can solve the 80, not necessarily just look at the 20.
No, absolutely. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think one of the things we've seen going back to the demand is we're working with a couple of customers. We all kind of chatted in preparation for this on Monday. And one of the things that we're trying to help our customers do is be a little bit more flexible and agile in times of economic, unrest and how do they manage the unknowns? And that's with contingent labor, right? And so we're kind of having a full circle moment here with many of our customers where we're trying to help them look at their demand and how they can increase the flexibility of their business operations by leveraging contingent labor. And, it's interesting because this industry's been around for a long time, but in many cases it's immature. And so we find ourselves having these almost greenfield conversations with organizations that, to the effect of, if you leveraged contract labor in your facilities versus FTEs, you'd be a little less stressed out right now, given this time of uncertainty. So it's an opportunity, I think, for those of us in this industry to educate and to evangelize the use of contract labor as a means to make the organization more impervious to the economic unknowns. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Those are good points. And it's interesting because I think like in 2008, when the economy started slowing down, we saw companies stop hiring full-time, but then they still need the work done. So they're hiring contractors. And last year, the economy slowed down, and I think they just stopped hiring across the board. And this year, it seems like as we wait for the economy to stabilize and policies to stabilize, there is a little bit of pop, at least in the first quarter, from what we've seen in sort of demand for the contingent side. Gabriel, are you finding the same thing across your customers?
Yeah, and I think what Angie was saying makes me think of what we've been doing, right? Which is helping our customers to recalibrate their contingent workforce strategy in the three levels, right? In the demand, specification, and price, right? See what they need, what is it that they really need in terms of, so you sit down with them and understand where the business is going and how much they can bring, because we know the more they bring us to the table, the more we can move from siloed processes to a full talent solution for them. So you come to the table, you understand what they need, then the specifications of that need, right? What are the new needs that this new talent in the world is bringing today that we haven't hired before, they haven't hired before. So we can work through those together, see what we are seeing from a more holistic view of the market. And then you land in discussing price. That's how we've been, at least at this stage, from this question, and not to steal the thunder for where our conversation is going, but that's how I've been approached. We've seen, and we're approaching further.
And Gabriel, to that end, we're seeing the conversation shift from, when you're talking about need, we're really talking about outcomes, right? What are the outcomes that we're desiring? And ergo, what type of talent do we need to help us achieve those outcomes? So we're really kind of raising the conversation up a little bit to how do we help the business function better versus, what's my head count? What's the rate card? And, what's the cycle time? It's more, are we achieving the business outcomes that we are all trying to accomplish?
So speaking of, you guys both mentioned the holistic approach. So can you talk to me about some specific examples on how do you create a more holistic approach for your contingent workforce program to add value, not just cost?
Yeah, and I'm happy to address that. So, in my previous life, I was at Phillips 66, and we had implemented this program, right, where before there wasn't really a true policy. Everybody, of course, there was a policy about onboarding contractors and all that. But so the first and foremost is you have to understand, like we do in anything in life, right? Create a white sheet, right? What are you trying to get out of this, right? If it is overall reduction of the program cost, whatever that looks like, how are you going to get there, right? And if you just focus on price, right, so how much we're paying people, you're missing a whole big component. That's what Gabriel was talking about between price, demand, specification. So when we whiteboarded this, we sat there and said, what are the big cost levers that we have? One, high margins, right? So that is price, but the high margins come from what? Well, utilizing 140 different suppliers when we only have, when I say only, but you only have 1,300 or 1,400 contractors in a program. And then when you look at it, it's a true Pareto analysis, right? You have 7 or 8 suppliers, 7 or 8 staffing agencies that you work with that hire 85 to 90% of it. Okay. So there's a long tail of 100 to 130 suppliers where you only hire one contractor from. What does that happen? Well, that happens because you don't have a policy and you don't have it filtering to a certain choke point, so to speak, which is an MSP in this case, right, to help you manage those resources. The other big thing, right, when you start to go to specifications, what are the people actually doing? So scope. Right? The scope of what you have people and what you're paying them for, because that's where, some people have been there for quite a while, which that creates its own complexities, right? But if they're being hired to be, say, an engineer level 3 or whatever that gets coded as, and they're $140 per hour, and then you scope out what they're doing, and you find out that they're really just doing the job of somebody that's more junior from an engineering standpoint, that's the proper scope, right? So you should be hiring and matching like for like with what you're doing in that capacity. And then the true, like I said, demand, managing the supply base, but then just how many people are filtered through that program? Do you have a true contingent labor strategy where, again, this is supposed to be temporary, right? So if it's going to be longer term, if there's going to be certain things that you have, do you have a hiring plan for that? Do you have basically a refresh plan for that? What is your end goal for each person that you're bringing on? And are you clear with the expectations with that? Of course, some people get extended, right? But you have to go through that process. So rate cards are also a huge deal, right? So standardizing how you actually are paying, That's where I think MSPs are invaluable, because they have the data more readily available to them than, I would say, than anybody else, usually typically that you're working with directly in your department. And then the other big thing for me is a balance, right, between how you're actually approaching it as a company. Is it procurement versus human resources? And I see people go one or the other a lot of the times, like, well, no, that's all managed by human resources. Oh, no, that's all managed by procurement. You have to have a balance. And that was a big thing that we did, was to make sure that we pulled those resources together to sit there and say, we need the human resource side of this, but then we also need the procurement to help manage that MSP and the cost side of that too. And when you merge those together, again, that creates the most value. So anything in life, whether or not it's MSPs and contingent workforce or supply chain and categories and all that, you will only drive cost if you look at it as that total cost ownership model, right? Not just let me go see if I can go reduce my margin through a price negotiation. So,
Great
I think Gordon. Yeah, I think Gordon just did a masterclass at like 101 of total talent management. I think that's just go ahead and mark that down for anybody that's trying to learn what to do with your program. But I would say on top of that, it's go figure, the client relationship guy is going to say is working closely with your partners, and in somebody in my role, making sure that, not to steal from Alexander Hamilton, be in the room where it happens, right? Making sure that you're going and you're meeting with your procurement lead, or you're meeting with your MSP lead, or whoever that is, making sure that you're spending the time to understand what they're trying to accomplish. Because without that, I mean, really, what are you doing? And you're becoming transactional. And that's not where we want to live. If you're trying to drive cost, process, if you only focus on the transaction, you've lost touch with your client, and you're going to lose direction from where they're wanting to go.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, Brian, is you and I sit in a role where we're often challenging the client to make sure that they are also communicating the goals of the organization to their providers. We often see that at the onset of a program, the objectives of the program are typically well known and understood by all, but things change over time. And that's where we see the breakdown of communication happen. And we think it's really important to reiterate the goals and share the pain, so to speak, as the business evolves and the business needs change. And I'll give you an example of where I've seen this work well. Post-pandemic, I was working with a customer who couldn't get product out the door fast enough. And like so many organizations, they were suffering from supply chain bottlenecks, and it was really affecting their business. And we did an analysis for them, and we found that their contract labor rates were largely under market for what they were asking their talent to do. So we proposed an increase across the board that I believe it netted about $4 million a year. That's never a fun conversation. You go to, your stakeholders at an organization, you say, you need to spend more money. But in this case, it was a C-level conversation, and they took our advice right away. It reduced their turnover within their contractor base. It allowed them to produce more product, and the ROI on increasing the rates was spectacular, right? And so that's, again, an example of where you're changing the conversation from cost savings, that margin's got to be less. You've got to be paying, the most competitive in the market to, are you getting the work done? Is the product going out the door, or do we need to change something? And it really took the buying entity to share the pain, to say, this is our true problem. This is what we need to solve for now. And we all need to adjust to face the realities of today versus those that we were facing when we started this program.
Sorry, if can I interject? Because Angie said something there that really made me smile. But I think one thing I want to say, it also takes to talking about us as MSP, right? We are the intercessors between client and the suppliers, right? We can't operate without our suppliers, and we need it's an ecosystem of talent movement. And I say that because with my team, I also emphasize also the two-way street. It's not only us thinking that we know everything and we are the only ones sharing to the suppliers. It's also having the humility to ask, what are y'all also seeing out there that can bring that knowledge so benefit the customer ultimately altogether. So it brings us, and everybody feels part of the conversation, right?
That's
And
a really good point. That's a
right,
really good
not
point.
only being I'm the owner of truth and what I say is true. It's like, no, you know a lot because you work with a lot of other needs. What am I missing here? What is this situation creating that we can work together? I sent an email today, one of my suppliers today, because they were talking about the whole Washington State sales tax or New Mexico and the VMS. Not anyway, the whole VMS, and it's another conversation. But at the end of the day, they were expecting me to give a solution, and I said, we're working, we're discussing. I'll come back to you in certain time. But let me ask you, while I tapped this email, it came to me. I really wrote it down, and I said, what are your other clients doing about this? How are you solving this with them? There's something for me to learn there. I think it's when really the ultimate beneficiary that it's the client, because then you come with a bigger knowledge, and they know that, again, there's power in that synergy of letting the conversation flow all the way.
Yeah.
Gabriel, that speaks to trust though too. Like you do a good job of creating trust with that supplier base and that supplier population, so that you can have that conversation, right? You can't always be the hammer, right? Sometimes it's got to be a lot softer, and you got to create that trust so that you can have open dialogue.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm really I think some of the themes that are resonating from what you guys are saying is there's more ownership, communication, and accountability, right? Because you're not saying, well, that's HR's problem, or that's procurement's problem, or that's the supplier's problem. Like you're saying, let's all talk through these issues and really add value. Do you think that's part of the reason why there seems to be a shift the last few years, like moving more from contingent into SOW, because we want value add more than margin?
Yeah. They want the outcome, right? And the accountability of the overall outcome versus, I think it's become less important. The who has become less important, and the skills and the outcomes have become more important. And so I think that is part of the reason why you've seen that shift. And I think it's going to continue to go that direction as well. Because there's certain industries where, that won't, high volume industries where that's likely not going to necessarily change. But I think where companies see the value in leveraging contract labor to achieve big business goals, we're going to continue to see that trend.
Yeah, seeing outcome is easy in a manufacturing facility, right? The product goes out the door. It's easy to manage the line. Everybody knows where there needs to be a head count on the line. The product goes out. Everybody high fives. They go home for the day. It's a lot more difficult in a program where there is the professional side, where there's an accountant and that FTE is gone. Well, I need to backfill that. Well, do you really need to backfill that? Like, the outcome is different in a professional environment. It's a lot easier in a manufacturing facility. That's some pretty simple stuff, but it gets a little bit more complex, and that's where the conversations come. Do we really need this role? Well, do we need this goal? Not necessarily that role. And that's where you need to really be communicative with your partners.
And I think that's where AI has come in, right, Brian? Where we don't all know yet how much of each role can be delegated to AI. We don't know. We're still we're still all learning that. But I don't know if we care. If we push it to an outcome-based engagement, we don't really care what the mix of AI versus human intelligence is in getting that work done. We just want it done, and we want it done well. And so I think when you push it to an outcome-based engagement, you're safeguarding yourself from having to know what the expectation is from an AI versus human interaction perspective.
And are you seeing clients allow vendors to use AI? Because I see sometimes they ask us if we can use it, but then they ask us not to use it.
In what part of the process? Because I've seen like the whole AI candidate interview or
Well, that's a great example. Candidate interviews. So I think what AI has done for us, it's helped us on the back end operations, streamline like invoice matching and things like that, right? And some candidate sourcing, but the actual interview process, we're getting more resumes per job because AI allows me to mass adopt my background into the job description. And so you're getting more fake candidates, and then it's creating more human touch in the loop because we have to basically figure out if somebody's real or not.
I've heard that. I've heard that from a number of buyers. It's making it more challenging on the candidate selection side as well. So while we think it's, creating speed, in some cases it's not.
Because AI is a great, as it says, assistant. It still needs someone to really make, when it's left to its own device, it's not going to do any good to anyone. So I know this is not about, we're talking about the great value and the great outcome. That's why when Angie mentioned AI and you start touch base, I made that joke because that's something we are looking close. It's when candidates are misusing it, vendors are misusing it, people are putting faces that are not even their own and in whatever interview process, but it's a great assistant, but it needs the human there. And both together, I'll go back to what Gordon just said, and the whole ecosystem. What Angie was saying made me think, and I know, Gordon, you're muted yourself, you're ready to say something there. But it's the whole team together when you come to the table about what the outcome is, in Brian's example, about the person that left or is on leave, whatever. You bring everyone. You bring talent acquisition, HRBP, procurement. Like, you have only one will have a blind spot. You bring new people to the table and leveraging your MSP and seeing them more than transactional and operational of the execution, but more like, you guys see what I don't see. You have a much greater view. What's going on out there? Bring everyone to the table to discuss. Know the value that we want to deliver and what the outcome is. Now we go stepping back to see what we really need to deliver here to get there.
Yeah, and the other thing with AI too, because I've been to a few conferences where obviously it's the hot topic, right? Everybody wants to talk about AI these days. AI has simply matured from infancy to toddler stage. And a lot of the opinions of like, what's that? Now, when we get to the full grown adult or teenager down the road, like, it's going to be insane what some of the capabilities of AI are that really do start to potentially say, do you need the workforces that you do? Right now, it's just a great tool to make people more efficient, right? And I will tell you that most of these companies, at least every company I've worked at, between Shell and Phillips and even NFE, now at Chart, we have an incredible backlog of things that we need to get to, right? So as you hire the contractors, no one usually, I won't say never, but typically you're not hiring above what your needs are. And if you do, you make changes very quickly. Again, contingent labor, contingent workforce, where it can help you. But at the same time, what it is just making us all more efficient, right? And so as you become, you figure out the tools and ways to make that efficiency work, right? Then you can really start to map out, how many do we need? Right? Where do we need them at? Like, what's the type of levels and the type of backlogs that we have that we can go address? And it's still very hard in manufacturing, right? Because I will say, it's very straightforward what you need, but there is such a safety component to things. There's such a personal touch to things, right? So they're always still going to need that person, right? Again, temporary or not, what that looks like to still work it. So I think we're at that toddler stage where it's like, well, this is starting to grow. It's starting to crawl. It's starting to do things that we really like. But it's not to the point where you can just turn over a job to AI, right? And we're not going to be there for at least a few years before you start to really see that kind of manifest itself. So if anything, when we start talking about contractors, it is something I want to know. Are you familiar with digitalized tools, AI? Like, how would you do this with jobs, all that type of thing? I want to know their capabilities with it. But I still look at it as more of just an enhancement tool that they're going to be more productive with what they do, not necessarily taking over for what that job would have been.
Well said.
Gordon, I love that. I love that you said it's a toy. It was a toddler stage right now, because I feel like last year companies spent a ton of money on buying AI products and then telling their employees to use it, but there's no change management involved in like how do you make it effective? And so you kind of created a toy for people to play with and distract them from working almost, right? Because you didn't get. And I think 2 years from now I don't know why we forgot change management in this whole thing, but we did, and I think that's where it's missing.
No, absolutely.
Angie, you were saying?
No, I think that's well said. I think at the end of the day, these companies are still hiring humans to help. And we just can't quantify what that efficiency is that's gained right now. So I think that's the conundrum that a lot of buyers are in is, should I still pay the same rate for this person if they're using some AI? Or we don't know. We can't quantify it yet.
Yeah, I think the value for clients is the loss or the absence of loss from we've made the hire to now that individual is sitting in that seat. That gap where you lose individuals, that cycle time is really helping in the AI space. That really is helping. So you're not losing them in the conversations between the offer made, background, onboarding, all of that kind of stuff. A lot of those efficiencies are being gained through AI, and I think that's where you can really create value for your company, because you're not grinding just waiting for that individual to start.
And Brian, shouldn't we look at AI as an enablement tool? So, for example, if I was a financial analyst in the 90s and we give you Excel, like I should still pay the same amount for you to do your job, but you should be able to do a lot more of your job because you have Excel now to do your modeling. Right?
Yeah, it's like the risk calculator, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Like the math teacher from when I was growing up, it said you'll never carry a calculator with you all the time, so you need to know how to do long division. Well, now we're walking around with a phone, so yeah, it's an enablement tool.
I can't tell you how many hours I spent writing that contingent labor policy for Phillips 66. And and I had all
don't do it to yourself, Gordon.
I had all the components, I had all the different things laid out, like I said, white sheeting and structure and how I wanted this to all be. But like I spent hours and hours with executives sitting there going like, okay, no, I wanted to say here to, not therefore, and things like that. And I just look back, I'm like, good Lord, I wish I had ChatGPT back then, right? Or Copilot, whatever it was. I mean, that could have been like an hour process of filtering through. And instead, it took me, weeks of personalized meetings and all that to get this wording correct, right? So, I mean, it's what you guys were talking about. Would have made me, and realistically, the policy was what governed us, but it was all the work that we had to go do for the change management at the road shows to go out to these different, refineries and business units and get everybody aligned. Because that was to a point earlier. Contingent labor hits everything. It hits every freaking department that you have within a company if you're doing it like you should, right? And so with that, you have to deal with change management with all these different people as you go through it. So again, utilizing any type of tools that help you get there and help you have a consistent message. But at the end of the day, it's still you doing the work, right? It's still you doing the work to make sure that everybody's aligned, that we're going to go forward on a clear path, that we all have the same orders and we all understand what's going on. So anyways, I know I'm merging the two last two topics together, but you guys are taking me back to some good days there.
So Brian, there's a lot of talk about business transformation, how companies can reshape your CWs in terms of demand, specification, and price. What are your thoughts around that?
So I think it goes back to what Angie, Gabriel and Gordon, we've all said is really focusing on what direction you want to go. So when you look at transformation, it's not transformation just for transformation's sake, or it's not just an analysis or an assessment of your program just for an assessment perspective. Really, what direction are you going? What's the outcome that you want to do, or what's the outcome that you want to have? And then really looking at it backwards from there. I think that's when you get a successful transformation program, or is you have the communication throughout the process. Like Gordon was talking about, like all the program and what he did was successful because of all the conversations that he had. There was a unified outcome that was across the board. The conversations happened. Now it's just a matter of reverse engineering and making sure that everybody is on the same page and going forward. That's how I look at it. Start at the end.
Yeah, I have clear opinion on transformation if you want me to weigh in, but 100%. It's and I said it earlier, but so I won't go on, like I could go on like a 40-minute speech about this. So I promise everybody out there I won't. Transformation to me is not simply price, right? So we sit there and say we want cost savings in a category. Again, whether or not it's content, because I had to do it for all the services for Phillips, right? So you had mechanical, you had scaffolding, you had contingent workforce, you had all these different things. But everybody talks about cost savings. Well, when you start to get to true cost savings of what you're targeting for these categories, it's 10%, it's 15%. That's what transformation means to me. And I promise you, if you try to go negotiate contractual rates down, there is not 10 to 15% usually to be had. And if there is, then you guys were behind the 8 ball to begin with. So transformation is truly looking what we've kind of said over and over again. that demand, the specification. How do things flow? If you take it a contingent workforce, again, how do we flow people in, right? What's the policy that governs it? But you have to do a deep dive into truly understand what the cost drivers are for those specific categories. And then the transformation part goes, how are you going to attack that? Is it because you have too many suppliers and you need to consolidate? Is it because you have, you're overpaying in certain areas? You're not being specific. So you keep, and everybody knows the analogy, but we're asking for a Rolls Royce when you need a Camry, right? All these different things, and they all pull together. And when you change them fundamentally and then set that as your core as you move forward, now that's transformation. And when companies talk about business transformation, that's just one category. You think about, especially at a major oil company, right? They're going to have 50 to 70 different categories, between all the different chemicals and catalysts and materials and services and all these different things that they attack. And now you attack it on a unified front. But when you start saying, like, I'm going to do a rapid negotiation and just get 2% off, that doesn't do anything. And by the way, it doesn't make your suppliers happier either, right? Because now you're squeezing them more and more when they have to make money too, right? So that's the other piece then when you talk about transformation, is then also tiering, right? You sit there and say, who's our tier one? True strategic partners. And you have to treat them as such. But you throw around that term all the time about, oh yeah, you're a strategic partner and I'll give you all my money back and, reduce your rates by 10. It's not a strategic partner. Strategic partners, you're trying to figure out ways for them to make money too, for them to increase their margins too, working with them on that. Then your tier two becomes tactical, right? And that's the majority of your suppliers, right? But how do we execute this together, right? But at the same time, we try to keep the cost down where we can. Again, you still have to make sure that you're locked up with making money. And then you have operational. And then that does become, how are we just squeezing this as low as we can? And when I think of contingent workforce with it, that's like a payroll supplier, right? Like, how am I supposed to get 10% off a payroll supplier when their margins are already like 9% or 8%? They got to cover FICA, FUI, SUI, and all this stuff. You can't do it. So the real attack pattern there becomes, how do we deep dive into those categories? How do we lay that all out and work that together? So anyways, like I said, that was my short version. I could go on a lot more.
I love it. I love that you just brought the 2%, because I do think that there's a direct correlation between like cost and delivery. And so if you push the cost down too much, you're not going to get delivery, right? And that's going to cost more. I always say free is cheap. Free is expensive.
Absolutely.
Angie, you mentioned that as a vendor, it can be hard to know what buyers' goals are if they don't know them themselves. How can buyers be more clear on their goals?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to my comments from before, where it's communicate the change, communicate the new pain that you're in. And, going back to your transformation comments, Gordon, does your talent strategy align with your brand as your brand has evolved, right? So we've seen legacy oil and gas companies shift from wanting to really be known for the renewable strategy, or wanting to be known as an energy tech company versus an oil and gas services company. Okay, well, as you've made that shift in your overarching goals, have you communicated that to your vendors and how they can help you achieve that? And that happens on an ongoing basis, right? So, we encourage our stakeholders at the QBRs to not just look at the supplier metrics and, what was your time to fill and what was your, what was your attrition? But does your supply base know what your goals are? And if they don't, that's on you. You need to communicate what they are. And the supplier should obviously be asking, but they aren't privy to internal changes necessarily within an organization. So it's really having that ecosystem conversation that Gabriel mentioned on a regular basis. It should be as important, in my opinion, during a QBR as looking at any other metric related to your supply base.
No, absolutely. Great points. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think QBRs are done incorrectly most of the time. It's just a focus on metrics, and the key stakeholders that you finally got into a room have now glossed over. They don't care about time to fill. They care about the optics of something or the direction of this. They want their program director to care and the head of their CWP program to care. But you now have an opportunity to speak with, a CPO or a CHRO, and you've led with statistics, right? And you lose that opportunity to really ask the question that Angie was talking about of, can I push you, Mr. or Mrs. Client, to tell me your goals so I can tell you how we're going to perform above and beyond those goals and how we can support you in that. So that would be my takeaway from anytime I hear a QBR. I think they're done backwards.
Well, and I will echo that too, which is we masquerade KPIs as data. Data is great, right? But KPIs are truly what should be driving your decisions and driving your relationship with your customers or your businesses and all that. And so that, and it's a skill. It's hard. It's an art sometimes too. It's, the science and the art, right? Of trying to figure out like, okay, what's the data behind this? But then how is it actually going to improve our business, right? If we implement these metrics that we think actually drive our performance, right? And instead, I mean, I saw that all the time, especially, no offense to Chart when I came here, but we have hundreds of what we call KPIs. And I'm like, if you have more than 10, they're not true KPIs. And that's data. Now that data is awesome, right? Like we need that data, right? But then how do you actually formulate that into, Brian, what you were just talking about, Andrew, what you talked about, into what the customer cares about, into what your client cares about, and that actually it's going to help them get to their end goal. But that also forces them to articulate your end goal. And Angie, just like you talked about, and you have to be able to sit there and say, this is what we want to be as a client or, or as an operator. We want to be the low cost, perform out of everybody. Okay, great. You can manage to that. Or we want to get the best quality of individuals that we can coming in. Okay, great. We can manage to that too. And we can keep costs stable and all that. But we have to be aligned with what you want. And then when you get really large corporations, sometimes it's going to differ by department. So, Gabriel, I don't envy you with some of the stuff that I'm sure you have to deal with Phillips these days too, because everybody does have a different priority department to department. So again, how do you encompass that still the mission of a company to do this, but at the same time, take into account the different nuances and variations with it? And KPIs are the key to that. And Brian, I thought you said it well. You can't have a good QBR. I call them BPRs, but we all call it a different acronym, right? Without having that appropriately.
Yeah. Gordon and Angie and Brian, they also kind of remind me. So one is you need to be clear with your vendors what you want out of them if you want them to perform and get the most out of them, right? But number two, with this QBR, like QBRs change based on tariffs, policies, year-end goals, right? Things like that. But the scorecard doesn't necessarily change to reflect what the goals are, right? And I think
That's right.
needs to also be
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of
if you're educating your client on the KPIs in a QBR, then you've done it wrong, right? There should be no surprises when it comes to that. So while I want to talk about the data, right? Because you need to talk about it. It should be an afterthought because everybody should know where everybody stands more so than just once a quarter.
100%. Gabriel, when we talk about MSPs adding value can be subjective. How do you generate ROI through value? And can you share some examples of that?
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting because historically we've been all discussing, right? Cost savings is what has historically been driving this conversation, and especially programs that sit exclusively under procurement. And when they shift to talent acquisition, sometimes they're not helped how to translate that language. And that's when an MSP adds value, because we help our clients to anchor the conversation, everything we're talking about, but what is now value for them. And here's where I'm going. I'm going to start back in the transformation and land in my answer, because everything we're talking about transformation, when I say transformation, one, I think it's been an overused word for many organizations and people and processes and professionals. But transformation for me is the clear picture of the butterfly from the caterpillar, right? It is something that is becoming what it was not. And at Phillips 66, they really started this thought process. And I think it's beautiful when my client and I, we sit down and she says that the name is Reimagine what is possible. So it really brings us to think, and back to my team, because the team is my team is a mix of people that has been here for so long and they know the ins and outs, and some people coming new, fresh. So it's when we stop and think, but it hasn't been possible. But what is possible? What is the outcome? We want to get to this. What can we do? Think out of the box for us to help our customer to get there.
Yeah.
The conversations have really been shifting. Now, I'll go back to your question about value can be very subjective, right? Like, what do you value? But that's when we start talking about ROI, and we bring value add measurable ROI when we focus on these concrete outcomes. And I'll tell it some, right? It sounds obvious, but then you talk about faster delivery of talent or improved quality of that talent. Risk reduction, we could cause loss or noise reduction. How many times in the past year have we heard of any lawsuit related to you client? None. So we're doing a good job. It's the kind of probably noise you don't want to hear, but risk reduction. And then you get to quantify that impact, because all these things together will lead to the famous cost savings we're all talking about. But in Gordon's example is so good, because if you keep pushing only on cost savings, at some point the suppliers will start having to pay to join the program, right? Instead of being paid for the service they provide. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about value, in the conversation around, but it's subjective, you say, no, there are ways to measure that. When you talk about speed and productivity, right? How fast we can bring someone in, and the cost that we call cost avoidance, which is, well, for every day that seat is not filled, it costs you so much. And depending on how specified that is, and we can bring that intelligence in to say, for example, this engineer can cost you up to $8,000 a week if you really don't bring that person fast. So you start helping your client to see that, yes, you have that myth of being subjective, but there are ways to measure and bring that ROI. There's quality and continuity of talent. Mm-hmm. You bring someone good and stays. And of course, we know it's temporary, but they stay for as long as the assignment is. And guess what? Sometimes the client likes them so much, they want to keep them forever and convert. Yep. Right? Those are metrics that you can show value and remove the myth of that it's only subjective, and ties back to Gordon's point of the KPIs. Choose those 3 to 5 things that really matter to you, the value they want to bring. Let's bring intelligence to you from market insight review that the MSP does. Guidant Global, we do that. And we say, these are best recommendation that will make you really good and will bring the value that you want. I mentioned 2, and I could keep going, but I know for the sake of time, I want to give space for us to talk more.
Yeah. Actually, I have a question to piggyback on Gabriel and to put you in the hot seat for a minute. You know, we've all stated our opinions, right? And we all think that it's this ecosystem, and we have, you've got consulting representation here, buy-side representation, MSP representation. What do we miss? What do you need as a supplier to make this a success? Because at the end of the day, you've got the keys to the talent, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what gets all of these business outcomes accomplished that we've been talking about. So, what did we miss? Where did we go wrong? Or do you think that these are some of the keys that we need to push the ecosystem to support?
I think these are awesome points. And I think what you guys are saying is absolutely the right direction. The only thing I would add to that is, so we have a few programs where the clients really listen to some of our input. And one of the suggestions I had, which we've been doing for years with them, is once a year, bring your top 5 or 10 suppliers together with the MSP, with the VMS and procurement and HR. And let's talk about what's working, what's not working. How do we make it better? And brainstorm in the room together. Because a lot of times decisions are made without the person who's actually providing the talent for you in the room. And you'll realize that when you put everyone in the room together to brainstorm, that you'll actually come up with solutions that are even more effective, will drive cost savings, also delivery. And then the second thing is, I know this is really hard, but it seems to be the hardest thing in the world to project what your spend by category is going to be for a year. And if you can provide that data, then I think you can give your vendors the ability to source better and pipeline and anticipate your needs.
I think that's great feedback, and it's something that we can all work with our customers on, right? And that's the ecosystem conversation, Gabriel, right? That you were talking about, that you're referring to.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. Brian, you've been both a leader in the MSP space and also a business owner yourself. So how does that change your perspectives, and how do you manage your contingent workforce differently, given, the pressures of small businesses sourcing and providing talent?
Yeah, going from a startup that started at a folding table in my kitchen is a little different than managing a couple $100 million under under Guidant. I think I think the same things apply. Whether you're doing it at a 5-person level or you're doing it at a 100-person level, and that is we're in the people business. So when we talk about transformation, we talk about outcomes, we talk about setting clear objectives and goals so that our supply base can be successful. We were doing the exact same thing, right? Or at least we were trying to do the right thing. Like we're all trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. It's taking the minutia that is a luxury in a small business, right? Because you can really get in the weeds because you wear 15 hats, and trying to expand that into the world of an MSP or in the world that I sit in now in the consulting world. It's how do we have the ability to get to the minutia so that we can solve the problem. It's a lot tougher when you put it at a larger scale, but the process doesn't change, right? And I think we need to recognize that, and I think we need to recognize that we are dealing with we're in a people business, and people business is hard because it's people. It's not a widget. It's not cold medicine that we're putting on a shelf. It's the people behind that. So as long as you take that mindset of I'm working with somebody, not something, then you can be successful. And I think that's how you have to approach it.
I love that.
Yeah.
What do you guys think that buyers aren't asking for that they should be asking for? And how can CW leaders help these buyers see their blind spots? Gabriel, you want to go first?
I can. I think
everyone thinking.
Obvious, but based on everything we said here before and being back in Brian, it's one, they don't know what they don't know. And that's one of the reasons why we're here, to help them open their eyes, expand their horizons. But I think the question that they could be asking more is, how can my MSP help me achieve my outcomes or drive the business outcomes and not just fill my orders? Really seeing us as a partner that can be part or is already a part of their total talent acquisition strategy that Gordon outlined way in the beginning of our call, right? If you keep looking at your MSP only as your transactional partner or fill the orders that will take those yes sir, yes ma'am, and keep moving, the conversation will never evolve. There's always be a block. If you don't think and like we're saying, QBRs, they're so underrated because, or like Brian said, they've been done wrong historically, right? It's a great opportunity to bring people, other leaders, to come and hear and see, and more importantly, share what they want to achieve, what their priorities. Like Gordon said, there are so many different priorities. So bring them to the table so we can all listen and discuss and align the value, the add we want to bring to that. So I think of all that, it's really, our clients should be asking themselves, how can this solution that I already bought in, that I believe in, that's in my house, can really be part of what I want to achieve further, and not transactional.
I would say if you have trust with your client, the buyer should be asking, am I doing this correctly? Right? Like, is the solution that I'm walking down, that I've been walking down, say for several years, should I be on this path? Like, really, should I be on this path, or should there be a solution design? And I if you have that trust, then you can answer, or you can at least have the conversation about it. I think that's always the first one of what a buyer should be asking is this correct? Because if they brought you here to have that conversation, and a lot of times, it is correct for what you're doing today, but is it correct for what you want to accomplish tomorrow?
Yep. Angie.
Yeah, to piggyback on both of those, the one specific question I think that should be asked is, what are the best contingent labor programs doing, contingent workforce programs doing, and what do we need to do to get there? And I will tell you this, I was kind of asking that. That's not me trying to do a humble brag or anything, but but none of the other partners that we had in Phillips were actually asking that question because, and I'm not faulting anybody. It was a natural tendency to say, here's all of our issues. Here's all of our issues, whether it's with the MSP. Here's all of our issues, whether or not it's with our own contractor workforce. Here's all the issues. But there was never that exact question of like, well, what should, Brian, you said it well, like, what should we be doing? And to me, that is, what are the best ones? The best ones is an MSPs and everything that you guys deal with. What is the common trait? What's the common denominator, right? That makes them successful programs, right? And when you get there, I think we fundamentally got there as a company, right? But it was never the outset. It was more so everybody's watched Seinfeld. It was like Festivus. We're airing our grievances, right? Like on everything. It's just a natural tendency as a company to just basically be like, I want to focus on what our issues are, but that's okay. How do we get to where that pinnacle would be, right? And then you have to ask yourself, do you want to go through that heartburn or that transformation to get to first quartile? Or if you're fourth quartile, do you really just want to get to where you're a stable 50%, second to third quartile program, right? And again, we all have this focus, like, we're going to be the best of the best. It's like, don't have to. What are the best qualities? And then how are we just elevating to there? So I think you guys both hit that very dead on with what you were saying, but that was the one specific question I think that needs to be asked.
And where are the gotchas, right? What should I have my eyes open to in order to prevent them and work with my ecosystem to problem solve a way around them? So a lot of times, we have great intentions, but there are likely roadblocks that we need to face to be able to implement a program successfully. A lot of those sit on the tech side. So how do you help me on the, from a technology perspective, support my program goals and get around these hurdles that I'm likely to face? If we don't know where those, if the buyer doesn't know where they sit, they should be asking us, what are the common hurdles that others have had to go around, and what's my competition doing? Just like Gabriel was saying, the suppliers know a ton. They know what the competition is doing, so if we have an open dialogue about that, we can help them be better as buyers as well.
Yeah. And Angie, I think to add to that, I think we've all gotten good at creating dashboards, KPIs, looking at data, measuring 50 different things. But I don't think it doesn't translate into what do I do with that data, right? And so I think part of what buyers should be asking consultants and MSPs and strategists is okay, we built all this fancy stuff, but how do I turn that into actual item intelligence?
Absolutely.
What are you most optimistic about in the future of contingent? Let's not all get too excited.
Well,
Gordon, you first.
kind of the theme of what we talked about already. We're getting better and better at it, especially as MSPs go. I think that they're more developed. AI plays into this, the data that can really be shown and presented to clients. And then, it was the most successful story of all business transformation for Phillips 66 when we went through it from a pure savings standpoint. Mm-hmm. And it was hard, but it's worth it, right? And so with that, I think that's a similar story for all these different people, all these different companies. Is that there can be huge successes. And it's not necessarily always about saving money, but it's about fitting the needs of your business, right? And I think with the technology, like I said, everything that we have, I think that will only get better and better, right? Again, the alignment between MSPs as partners, the data that we have from it, and then at the end of the day, then the experience of the contractors that even work within those contingent workforce programs too. So it's because it is a huge benefit. It's a benefit for everybody on a personal scale, emotional scale, a business critical needs scale. Our human capital or human resources are, paramount. And in times like this and geopolitical turmoil and all that, it's never more important to treat them in a great manner too. So
I love it.
Yeah, I would say optionality. It's not just one thing anymore. It's not just one solution. We have a number of different solutions to make sure that the buyer achieves their goal. Staffing is staffing, right? And suppliers do their job and the buyers do their thing. But now we have a lot of different options for those buyers to go be successful and to utilize the supply population appropriately.
For sure.
I would say economies of scale. When we have sponsors like Gordon who believe in bringing procurement and HR together and showing an organization that the contingent workforce is a massive value add to the entire organization, that becomes really powerful. Then they have a buying tool that they can use at their disposal to really achieve their corporate goals. And removing those silos is exciting, and having a conversation about the contingent workforce as an entity across an organization is exciting.
I love it. And Gabriel?
I mean, I should have gone first because they said it all, but I'll say it. Is to see how we are also evolving and being transformed with our clients, right? We are organizations ourselves, and seeing, so you thought about optimistic about the future, is to see where else MSPs, what else they will become as we are being transformed through the needs and the outcomes we want to drive. I was thinking about how we become more of a strategic lever for the business, right? Being if it's agility or specialized skills or innovation rather than only cost control. And how we become at Guidant Global, I see that, and I've been here for a few months now, but it's impressive to see how our leadership is pushing harder and harder towards that. Angie mentioned some silos and stuff, and it's not only outside, it's inside. We get sometimes so consumed in our own worlds or clients, but it's expanding our horizons to what is everybody doing? So we become a true source of value for every client we touch. And it's now what we're doing is sometimes I pull someone from Duke Energy, and we can put both clients to talk. Like, look, we are doing this here. It's going well. To Gordon's point, what are other programs doing and doing really well here? Let's put our clients to talk. So see that evolution when you break silos and you become a true facilitator of knowledge and let that energy and synergy flow. I think I'm sound maybe poetic and stuff, but it's really something I believe in, and I'm seeing it. And then see how we become true models of total talent, right? And the client gets the option to tap in any type. Is it a gig? Is it contingent? Is it SOW? Is it full-time? You really are part of this true total talent engagement, because a customer has a need. We become a one-stop shop for everything they need. So seeing how it's becoming, we're going there, it really excites me about the future.
I love it. To add to that, I'm going to say that I think with all this dynamic change happening, the instability, the AI, the invent of AI, just watching you guys talk with each other, it reminds me that change gives the opportunity for partners to be partners. And so let us all partner, and I think that's the core of it, is that's how you navigate through these things. This is an amazing conversation. I'm honored to have you all here today. Thank you so much for doing this. And it was such a joy.
Thank you.
Thanks for
really
having us,
appreciate it.
Ash. It's fun
Thank you.
to talk to you.
Thank you guys. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
All right, sounds good.